My sister told me there was no room for me at her wedding. What she didn't know was that I was the silent owner of the very venue she booked for her exclusive celebration. I stayed quiet, let her dig her own hole, and waited until the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Caroline Mercer, and I never imagined that my own flesh and blood would cut me out of her life's biggest moment. Growing up in a small town in Vermont, I was the older sister, the one who patched scraped knees, braided hair for school, and defended her from bullies in the playground. My younger sister, Rebecca, was the golden child in everyone's eyes, bubbly, charismatic, and somehow always landing on her feet no matter what trouble she stirred up. I didn't envy her sparkle. I was proud of her. Or at least, I used to be. Our family had always been tight-knit, or so I thought. My parents doted on Rebecca endlessly, while I was the one expected to handle responsibility, managing chores, watching her when they were busy, and sacrificing my own teenage freedoms so she could enjoy hers. I never complained. I assumed that when the time came, when milestones like weddings or children entered the picture, she would finally see me not just as the dependable big sister, but as someone she'd want by her side. That illusion shattered the day Rebecca called me with what she framed as big news. She was marrying her fiancé, Daniel, a man I barely knew. She bubbled with excitement over the phone, describing her dress, the flowers, and the dream venue they had booked for the fall. I listened, smiling despite myself, until she suddenly hesitated. "Caroline," she said, her voice tight with an edge I recognized but couldn't quite place, "we're keeping the wedding intimate. Just close friends, you know? We don't really have space for extended family." The words hit me like a punch. "Extended family?" I asked, stunned. "Rebecca, I'm your sister." There was a pause, followed by a sigh. "I know, but you've always kind of done your own thing. This is my day, and I want it my way. I don't think you'd really fit the vibe we're going for." Fit the vibe. That phrase replayed in my head for days afterwards, echoing louder each time. My sister wasn't just cutting me from the guest list, she was deliberately excluding me, as though my presence would ruin her picture-perfect day. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, or maybe that she was under pressure from Daniel's side of the family. But the truth was harsher. She simply didn't want me there. It might have ended there if not for one crucial detail: the venue. When Rebecca gushed about it, she mentioned a sprawling estate just outside Burlington, known for its gardens and renovated ballroom. What she didn't realize was that 2 years earlier, I had quietly bought that estate. I'd been working in event management for over a decade, saving and investing wisely. When the opportunity came to purchase the historic Harrington Manor, I jumped at it, though I chose to keep my ownership discreet. On paper, it was managed through a holding company, with staff and a manager who handled day-to-day operations. Very few people knew the real owner was me. So when Rebecca bragged about booking the venue, I smiled to myself. Fate had an interesting sense of humor. She thought she was excluding me, but in reality, she had walked straight into my world. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with that knowledge. Part of me wanted to call her bluff immediately, to demand why she would erase me from her life while celebrating in a place that literally belonged to me. Another part of me, the more cautious part, told me to wait, to observe, to let her show her true colors before I decided how to respond. The following weeks only deepened the sting. I heard through distant cousins and mutual friends how Rebecca paraded her engagement, how she described her wedding as the event of the year. Photos of bridal showers and bachelorette outings flooded social media, each one conspicuously absent of me. My parents, caught in the middle, avoided the subject whenever I visited. When I finally asked my mother about it, she looked away uncomfortably. "It's Rebecca's choice," she murmured. "She wants it small." Small? The guest list, from what I gathered, included nearly 100 people, coworkers, college friends, distant relatives from 3 states over, but not me. I buried myself in work, overseeing other couples' weddings at the manor. Each time I watched a bride walk down the aisle supported by smiling family, I wondered how Rebecca could so easily dismiss me. Yet with every event, I also realized something powerful. I had the ultimate card in my hand. She thought she had control, but the moment she signed the rental agreement, she had placed her dream day entirely in my power. And I wasn't about to waste that opportunity. At first, my plan was simple. Let her go on believing I was invisible. Let her build her perfect castle on a foundation she didn't even know I owned. Then, when the day arrived, I would decide just how much of the truth to reveal. Would I expose her cruelty in front of everyone? Would I simply walk in, uninvited, and remind her whose roof she was under? Or would I find a quieter, sharper way to teach her a lesson about respect, family, and humility? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She thought she had written me out of her story, but this was my stage as much as hers. And when the curtain rose, the truth would come crashing down. In the days that followed Rebecca's dismissive phone call, I struggled to keep my emotions in check. I wasn't someone who cried easily, but I found myself sitting at my kitchen table late at night with tears sliding down my cheeks, staring at the muted glow of my phone screen. Social media became a constant reminder of the divide between us. She posted endless updates about cake tastings, gown fittings, and family moments that somehow excluded me. Each photo carried a caption dripping with excitement, portraying her life as flawless and joyful. To the outside world, it was a fairy tale. To me, it was a carefully constructed performance that left out the sister who had once been her biggest supporter. I tried to talk myself down, to remind myself that it was her wedding, her choice. But every time I remembered the phrase she used, "You don't fit the vibe," a knot of anger tightened in my stomach. What vibe was that exactly? Was it the vibe of pretending she'd been raised without me? That our shared childhood never happened? Or was it the vibe of surrounding herself only with people who fed her ego and overlooked the ugly truth of her selfishness? Work became my only refuge. I threw myself into the details of the manor's upcoming events, ensuring that every couple who trusted us with their big day felt cherished and celebrated. I spent long hours reviewing contracts, coordinating with vendors, and even pitching in on the floor when staff needed an extra pair of hands. It wasn't just about staying busy. It was about reminding myself that I had purpose, that my life wasn't defined by Rebecca's cruelty. Yet, no matter how much I tried to focus, I couldn't escape the irony that my own sister was planning her dream wedding at my property without the faintest idea of who held the keys. The manager of Harrington Manor, a capable and discreet woman named Linda, was the only one who knew the truth about my ownership. She had worked with me since the day I purchased the estate, and her loyalty was unwavering. One afternoon, as we were reviewing the bookings for the coming season, she paused over Rebecca's file. "This bride's been unusually demanding," she remarked, flipping through the paperwork. "She keeps calling about the floral arrangements, wanting everything changed last minute, even though the contract clearly states vendor choices are final. Her name's Rebecca Alden. Any relation?" I hesitated, then sighed. "She's my sister." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't comment at first. She set the file down carefully. "And you're not on the guest list?" "Not even close," I said bitterly. "Apparently, I don't fit her vibe." She studied me for a long moment before a slow, knowing smile curved her lips. "Well, that's interesting. What do you want to do about it?" Her question echoed in my head long after our meeting ended. What did I want to do? The possibilities stretched before me, each more tempting than the last. I could cancel the booking outright, leaving her scrambling for another venue just weeks before the wedding. I could impose restrictions, adjust the schedule, or even make her big day impossible to carry out. But then another thought struck me. Revenge wasn't just about destruction. Sometimes the sweetest revenge was letting someone think they had won, only to reveal at the very last moment that they had never been in control at all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Still, a part of me wrestled with guilt. This was my sister, no matter how cruelly she'd treated me. Would it be petty to use my ownership against her? Would it make me just as selfish as she was? I wanted to believe I was better than that. Yet, each time I remembered her smug tone, the way she dismissed me as though I were a distant cousin instead of her own sibling, my resolve hardened. The weeks passed quickly, each day bringing me closer to the wedding date. From behind the scenes, I watched Rebecca's plans unfold. She and Daniel visited the manor multiple times, fussing over seating arrangements and decorations. I stayed hidden, leaving interactions to Linda and the staff who carried out the requests with professional efficiency. But I watched, always watched. When Rebecca insisted that the main ballroom's chandeliers be polished until they sparkled like diamonds, I approved the overtime pay for the cleaners. When she demanded the garden be replanted with roses instead of hydrangeas, I quietly authorized the additional expense. Every outrageous whim she had, I allowed it. Because it wasn't about the money. It was about letting her believe that the world revolved around her, just as she always had. Meanwhile, my parents remained strangely silent on the matter. They attended all of Rebecca's pre-wedding events, posting photos with her and Daniel, smiling as though nothing was wrong. When I visited them one weekend hoping to find some kind of comfort, my mother avoided eye contact while my father muttered something about keeping the peace. Their silence cut deeper than Rebecca's exclusion. Not only had my sister rejected me, but my parents had chosen to look the other way. One night, as I sat alone on the balcony of my apartment, overlooking the quiet streets of Burlington, I realized something important. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about years of being overshadowed, undervalued, and pushed aside in favor of the golden child. Rebecca's dismissal wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of imbalance in our family. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to stop being silent about it. But how? How could I take a stand without lowering myself to her level? That question haunted me as the wedding drew nearer. I knew I couldn't stay invisible forever. The day would come when I'd have to reveal the truth, to show her and everyone else exactly who held the power in this situation. And when that day came, I wanted it to be unforgettable. The day everything shifted came not from Rebecca herself, but from a conversation I overheard at the manor. It was a brisk September morning, only a month before the wedding, and I had stopped by the estate to check on renovations in the West Wing. As I walked through the foyer, careful to remain unnoticed, I heard Rebecca's voice carrying from the ballroom. She was speaking to one of her bridesmaids, a college friend whose name I didn't know. Her words, sharp and tinged with arrogance, stopped me cold. "Caroline, please, don't even bring her up. She's not coming, and that's final. She always tries to make things about herself, and this day is about me. I mean, honestly, what would she even wear? Some business suit from her job? She'd stick out like a sore thumb." The bridesmaid chuckled in response, adding fuel to the fire. "You're better off without the drama. Besides, you've got all the family that matters right here." That line cut deeper than I expected. All the family that matters. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest. For the first time, I realized Rebecca wasn't just excluding me quietly. She was mocking me, painting me as some outsider who didn't belong. The image of our childhood together, the sleepovers, the whispered secrets under blankets, the nights when she'd beg me to read her one more story, clashed violently with the woman I was hearing now. My sister wasn't just careless, she was cruel. I left the manor quickly, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel of my car. My first instinct was to call her, to confront her outright, but something in me hesitated. If I called her, she would brush it off, twist the conversation, and make me out to be overreacting. That was always her tactic: manipulation, deflection, and charm. I'd fall into the same trap I had so many times before. No, this time had to be different. This time, I needed to see it clearly. The old way of keeping quiet, of swallowing my hurt, wasn't working anymore. The breaking point had arrived, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my desk, staring at the contract for Rebecca's wedding. My name wasn't on the paperwork, of course. It was all under the holding company. But every clause, every signature of approval, every authorization of expense traced back to me. In black and white, it was clear. Her wedding only existed because I allowed it. The power dynamic had shifted without her realizing it, and for the first time, I considered what it might look like to use that power deliberately. But it wasn't only about vengeance. Deep down, it was about justice. Rebecca had spent her whole life coasting on charm, while I carried the weight of responsibility. She had never been forced to face consequences for her selfishness. If I did nothing, if I allowed her to continue erasing me from her story, then I would be complicit in letting that pattern endure. And I couldn't do that anymore. Still, I wasn't reckless. I spent the next few days carefully weighing my options. Canceling the wedding outright was too heavy-handed. It would make me the villain, and Rebecca would spin the narrative to her advantage. But allowing the wedding to proceed unchecked would be equally intolerable. What I needed was a way to expose the truth, to let her arrogance unravel itself without me lifting more than a finger. I wanted the world, or at least the people she so desperately wanted to impress, to see her true colors. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Linda called me into her office with a tight expression. "Your sister's been making changes again," she said, sliding a revised seating chart across the desk. She insisted that we rearrange tables to move certain guests closer to the head table. Apparently, she doesn't want less important people cluttering the front rows. I scanned the chart and froze when I saw the names. Rebecca had pushed our cousins, the only relatives who had always stood by me, to the farthest corner of the ballroom. Meanwhile, Daniel's fraternity brothers and college buddies now occupied prime spots near the dance floor. It was another insult, another statement that her version of family didn't include me or anyone connected to me. "Does she realize how insulting this is?" I asked quietly. Linda gave me a pointed look. "I don't think she cares, but I thought you should see it. You're the owner, after all." The word owner lingered in the air like a secret weapon. For the first time, I said it out loud, almost as if testing the sound of it. "I'm the owner." Linda's expression softened into something almost mischievous. "Exactly, and she has no clue." That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Rebecca's behavior had made one thing blinkingly clear. If I kept letting her call the shots, she would continue to belittle me and erase me. But if I stepped forward, if I finally drew the line, I could change the narrative. I could reclaim my place, not just in the wedding, but in my own family's story. The decision wasn't easy. Part of me feared what would happen when the truth came out, how my parents would react, how Rebecca would spin her rage. But the greater fear was doing nothing, of once again being the invisible sister. I realized then that the old way of enduring silently had reached its breaking point. I couldn't go back. So I made myself a promise. I would no longer hide behind the scenes. I would no longer allow Rebecca to dictate the terms of our relationship. When the moment came, I would reveal the truth, not just about the wedding, but about myself. Rebecca thought she had all the power, but the reality was about to shift. And for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of control resting firmly in my hands. The first signs that Rebecca's carefully crafted facade was beginning to unravel came not from her, but from the people orbiting her. I had made my decision to stop staying silent, and though I hadn't revealed my ownership yet, the tension inside me had shifted. I was no longer the passive sister waiting for scraps of acknowledgement. I was watching, waiting, preparing for the cracks to show. And sure enough, they came. It started with a phone call from one of our cousins, Emily. She was one of the few relatives who had always checked in on me, the kind who sent birthday cards and called just to say hello. "Caroline," she said, her voice laced with hesitation, "I just wanted to ask you something. Is it true that you're not invited to Rebecca's wedding? I stiffened, caught off guard. That's what she told me. Emily sighed heavily. I thought so. She told everyone it was a small ceremony, but then I saw the guest list at Aunt Linda's. Caroline, there are over 100 names. People I've never even heard of are on there, but not you. Her words weren't news to me, but hearing them spoken aloud by someone else felt like validation. That's right, I said evenly. I'm not invited.
There was a long pause on the other end of the line. That's not right, Emily finally whispered. People are starting to ask questions. Everyone assumed you'd be her maid of honor, not absent altogether. Something doesn't add up. I thanked her for calling, but after I hung up, I sat still for a long while, the phone resting on my lap. The secrecy Rebecca thought she'd preserved was beginning to crack under the weight of scrutiny. Outside eyes were starting to see the truth, and there was no way she could keep the illusion intact forever. Around the same time, I began noticing changes in the staff at Harrington Manor. Normally, they treated wedding clients with a polite detachment, focused on delivering flawless service without prying. But Rebecca was different. Her demands had grown more outrageous by the week, changing her mind about linens, requesting exclusive menu items not included in the package, insisting that the garden be replanted yet again. She acted not like a guest, but like a monarch ruling over peasants, and the staff began to notice. Linda pulled me aside one afternoon after a particularly grueling consultation. "Your sister's behavior is raising eyebrows," she said quietly. "She belittled the catering team today, called them incompetent, in front of everyone, because the tasting menu didn't match her Pinterest board. They're starting to resent her." I nodded grimly. That doesn't surprise me. Linda's gaze was steady. "The thing is, they also know you're connected somehow. They don't know you own the place, but they know there's a reason you're always around. They're beginning to put pieces together." That statement lodged itself in my mind. I hadn't yet revealed my role, but my presence at the manor, my quiet observations, and the way Linda deferred to me hadn't gone unnoticed. People were suspicious. They were starting to ask questions, and suspicion has a way of spreading. The shift became more obvious during one of Rebecca's walkthroughs. I stayed hidden in an adjoining hallway, just out of sight, while she and Daniel toured the ballroom with Linda. From where I stood, I could hear everything. Rebecca's voice carried, sharp and impatient. "The lighting in here feels too harsh. Can we change it to something softer? Maybe install new fixtures?" Linda's professional tone never faltered. "We can adjust the dimmers, but permanent installations aren't possible on this timeline." Rebecca huffed. "I don't care how you do it, just make it happen. I'm paying a fortune for this place. It should look exactly the way I want." Daniel, who had remained mostly quiet during these visits, finally spoke up. "Beck, maybe you should ease up a little. They're doing their best." Rebecca whipped around, her tone dripping with irritation. "Daniel, this is my wedding. Don't tell me to ease up." Silence followed, thick and awkward. Even Linda's polite smile faltered for a fraction of a second. In that moment, I realized something crucial. Rebecca's mask was slipping not just in front of me. Others were beginning to glimpse the person I had known all along. That night, as I replayed the scene in my mind, I understood the importance of timing. I didn't need to storm in, reveal my ownership, and throw her out. She was already doing the work for me. Every entitled demand, every careless insult, every display of selfishness was planting seeds of doubt in the people around her. My role was simply to wait and let those seeds grow until the truth became undeniable. Still, I couldn't ignore the gnawing tension in my chest. The wedding was only weeks away, and while Rebecca's cracks were showing, her narrative still held sway over many. My parents, for one, remained complicit. During a Sunday dinner at their house, my father praised Rebecca's taste and vision, while my mother gushed about the dress fittings. They spoke as though her wedding were the event of the century, carefully sidestepping my absence as though it was a minor oversight. I listened in silence, forcing a smile, while resentment simmered beneath the surface. How long could they keep pretending? How long before they too were forced to confront the truth? The turning point came when Rebecca's bridesmaid, the same one I had overheard earlier, posted a photo on Instagram. It was a picture of the seating chart, partially blurred but still readable if you looked closely. Within hours, Emily called me again, her voice urgent. Caroline, people are talking. Your name isn't anywhere on that chart and everyone's confused. Some are even asking if you two had a falling out. I felt my pulse quicken. The cover-up was unraveling faster than I anticipated. Rebecca couldn't control the narrative anymore, not with curious family members and observant staff piecing things together. The truth was creeping closer to the surface, and soon she wouldn't be able to hide it. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. The moment of no return was here. I had stayed quiet long enough, letting the cracks spread, but soon the foundation would crumble entirely. And when it did, I would be ready to step forward, not as the invisible sister she tried to erase, but as the one holding the strings all along. Rebecca thought this was her stage. She was about to find out it was mine.
The whispers began subtly, like an undercurrent running beneath the surface of a calm river, but they grew stronger with each passing day. I didn't have to go looking for evidence of Rebecca's arrogance and cruelty anymore. It came to me through cousins, staff, and even acquaintances who had caught glimpses of her behavior. The truth was gathering momentum, and I found myself standing in the middle of it, quietly collecting every piece. Linda was the first to provide me with concrete examples. One evening, she stopped by my office at the manor with a stack of reports. "She's pushing harder," she said, sliding the papers across my desk. Last week, she demanded that the pastry chef scrap the entire dessert menu and start from scratch because she suddenly decided cupcakes were too childish. Today, she screamed at the florist for suggesting peonies instead of roses. And yesterday, she called one of the servers useless in front of a group of guests during a tasting. I leafed through the reports, each incident more telling than the last. "She's burning bridges with everyone," I murmured. Linda nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly. "People are starting to notice. The staff won't say anything publicly, of course, but behind closed doors, they're talking. They think it's only a matter of time before something blows up." And she was right. Word was beginning to slip outside the manor's walls. Emily called me again after attending one of Rebecca's bridal showers. "Caroline, she made a toast, and I swear half the room looked uncomfortable. She kept bragging about how much money Daniel's family was spending, how everything had to be perfect because she deserved the best. And when someone asked if you were coming, she just laughed it off and said you were too busy with work to care about family stuff." My chest tightened at Emily's words. Not only had she excluded me, she was rewriting the narrative to make me appear cold and disinterested. It was a lie, but one I had heard before in different forms. Rebecca always knew how to bend the story to paint herself as the victim or the star while casting me in the shadows. The difference now was that other people were starting to catch on. Even Daniel seemed uneasy. I didn't know him well, but during another walkthrough at the manor, I watched from a hidden vantage point as he tried to reason with her. "Beck, don't you think we should slow down on the changes? It's getting expensive and you're stressing everyone out." Rebecca rolled her eyes dramatically. "Daniel, do you want our wedding to be mediocre? Because I don't. This is the one day I get to shine, and I'm not going to let incompetent staff or budget talk ruin it." His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw genuine doubt cross his face. That was when I realized Rebecca's behavior wasn't just alienating family and staff. It was beginning to strain her relationship with her fiancé. I began quietly gathering these pieces like puzzle fragments. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I made notes, stored reports, and tucked away conversations for the right moment. The evidence wasn't just about exposing her, it was about making sure when the time came, no one could deny the truth. But as I gathered evidence against her, I also faced my own internal conflict. A small voice whispered late at night asking if I was going too far. Was I allowing my hurt to transform into something darker? There were moments I doubted myself, moments when I wondered if I should just walk away and let her live with the consequences of her own arrogance. Yet every time I considered it, I remembered the sting of her words, "You don't fit the vibe," and the mocking laughter I overheard in the ballroom. Those memories steeled my resolve. My silence all these years had enabled her behavior. This time, the truth needed to come out, not just for me, but for everyone she belittled and dismissed along the way. The momentum built further when one of Rebecca's bridesmaids, different from the mocking one, reached out to me directly. Her name was Allison, a soft-spoken woman who had gone to high school with Rebecca. "I know this might be awkward, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize you weren't invited until recently. I thought maybe you'd chosen not to come, but then I heard how Rebecca's been talking about you, and it doesn't sit right with me." Her voice trembled with sincerity, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe not everyone was blind to Rebecca's games. "Thank you," I told her. "It means more than you know." Allison hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Look, I don't want to cause drama, but even some of the other bridesmaids are starting to question things. The way she talks down to people, the way she brags, it's not a good look. People are noticing." After we hung up, I sat in silence, absorbing her words. Rebecca's own circle was beginning to fracture. That was more powerful than anything I could have orchestrated. The truth was surfacing organically, woven through whispers and second glances, and all I had to do was let it gather strength. By the time the rehearsal dinner approached, the atmosphere surrounding the wedding felt strained. What was supposed to be a joyous occasion had turned into a tightly wound production fueled by Rebecca's obsession with control. The staff at the manor walked on eggshells around her. Family members whispered behind her back, and even Daniel seemed increasingly subdued. And me? I was ready. The evidence was no longer just in my hands, it was everywhere, visible to anyone who dared to look closely. The lies and cover-ups were cracking wide open, and Rebecca's image of perfection was collapsing under the weight of her own actions. She thought she had silenced me, erased me from her narrative, but little did she know, the truth was gathering like a storm on the horizon, and I was standing at its center, waiting for the moment when it would finally break. The rehearsal dinner arrived with a crisp autumn evening settling over the hills that surrounded the estate. The manor looked breathtaking as the last traces of sunlight spilled through the tall arched windows, bathing the stone walls in a warm glow. Outside, the courtyard lights flickered on one by one, casting a golden aura over the trimmed hedges and cobblestone paths. It was the perfect scene for celebration, but beneath the surface, tension coiled like a hidden serpent. I wasn't invited, of course, but that didn't mean I was blind to what was happening. The staff, loyal to me, kept me updated on every detail, and for once, I didn't need to orchestrate anything. The truth was taking its own path. Linda had slipped into my office that afternoon with a knowing look. "You'll want to keep your phone close tonight," she said, setting a small device on my desk. It was a discreet recording unit, one the staff occasionally used during disputes with unruly clients. "I've got one of the waiters wearing this. You'll want to hear what she says when she thinks you're not around." I didn't ask her to do it. She had taken it upon herself, and though I hesitated for a moment, I realized it was the kind of undeniable proof I needed. The whispers, the staff accounts, even Allison's call, they were powerful but could be dismissed as gossip. But Rebecca's own words, captured in her unfiltered arrogance, would be undeniable. As the evening unfolded, messages trickled in from Linda. At first, they were routine updates. The guests arriving, Daniel looking stiff but polite, Rebecca dazzling in a fitted white rehearsal dress. But then the cracks began to show. "She just snapped at the band," one message read. Another came minutes later, called the caterer's presentation amateur hour in front of everyone. I imagined the faces of the staff I'd come to know so well, hardworking people who took pride in their craft, wilting under her criticism. Anger bubbled in my chest, but I kept still, waiting. Then Linda sent a final message. You need to hear this." Later that night, when the dinner had ended and the guests filtered out into the cool air, I met Linda in the back office. She handed me the recording unit, her face unreadable. "Play the last 20 minutes," she instructed. I did, and my heart pounded as Rebecca's voice filled the room, sharp and dripping with disdain. "I don't care how much it costs, Daniel," she snapped, her tone cutting. "This is my day, and I won't have it ruined by second-rate service. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if you understand how important this is. Caroline doesn't get it either. She never has. She's always been lesser. Do you know she actually thought she could fit in here? I made sure she wasn't invited because, let's be real, she would embarrass me in front of everyone. She can run her little business, but she'll never be me." I froze, my fingers gripping the edge of the desk. Her words weren't just cruel, they were damning. She had admitted openly that she excluded me deliberately, not out of oversight, but out of malice. And she had said it in front of her fiancé. The recording continued, her laughter cold and arrogant. "Owning the building doesn't make her classy. She'll always just be the help, and I don't need that ruining my perfect image." Linda exhaled slowly beside me. "There it is," she said. "Proof." I sat back, letting the weight of it sink in. This wasn't gossip anymore. It wasn't hearsay or suspicion. It was Rebecca, unguarded and venomous, revealing exactly who she was. And it was recorded in her own voice. For years, I had been painted as the quiet one, the overlooked sister, the one who stayed in the background. But in that moment, I realized the narrative had shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was holding the truth in my hands, and it had the power to shatter everything Rebecca had built on her false image. The next day, whispers spread like wildfire. I didn't need to leak the recording immediately. It seemed Rebecca's behavior at the rehearsal dinner had been enough to spark serious doubt. Guests exchanged uneasy looks. Bridesmaids whispered behind her back, and even Daniel seemed more distant. The shine of her perfect image was tarnishing, and the storm I long sensed was finally brewing.
But I wasn't content to just watch. I had waited too long, endured too many slights, and now I had the undeniable proof I needed. I began quietly preparing for the wedding day itself, arranging small but significant details behind the scenes. I didn't intend to humiliate her for sport. I wasn't like her. What I wanted was clarity. The truth deserved a stage, and I intended to give it one. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the faint hum of the crickets outside my window, I replayed the recording again. Each word cut deep, not because I didn't already know how Rebecca felt about me, but because hearing it aloud removed any last illusion that perhaps I was overreacting. She hadn't just excluded me, she had sought to erase me, to degrade me. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had chosen my venue, my staff, my world as the stage for her cruelty. And that meant she had underestimated me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the forgotten sister. I felt like someone standing on the edge of a storm, holding the lightning in my hands. The rehearsal dinner had been her stage, but the wedding day, the grand event she had built her image around, was mine, and I was ready. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day photographers dream about, with sunlight glinting off the manor's windows and a soft breeze ruffling the leaves in the garden. I arrived early, as I always did, though no one expected me. The staff knew my presence was necessary, if discreet, to ensure the day ran smoothly, but the guests, and, of course, Rebecca herself, were unaware that I was in the building. I walked through the grand foyer with a calm smile, taking in the quiet hum of activity as florists arranged flowers, caterers set tables, and the bridal suite buzzed with excitement and nerves. I could hear the faint murmur of voices from the upper floor, Rebecca and her bridesmaids, likely fussing over hair and makeup, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath them.
For years, I had lived in the shadows of Rebecca's spotlight, always the dependable sister, the one who quietly took care of everything while she basked in attention. But now, with undeniable proof in my possession and a plan in mind, I felt the weight of control shift. Today was no longer just about her dream, it was about revealing the truth and reclaiming my voice. I moved through the manor with purpose, checking on final arrangements and making subtle adjustments that only someone who owned the space could authorize, ensuring everything was flawless, yet strategically designed for the moment when the truth would become unavoidable. The first signs of tension came before the guests even arrived. Daniel, normally composed and mild-mannered, approached the office where I was coordinating with Linda. "Something's off," he murmured, his voice low and uncertain. "She's different today, more demanding than ever. I thought the rehearsal was stressful, but this feels worse, almost like she's trying to control everything around her." I didn't respond immediately, simply giving him a measured glance. "It's a high-stakes day. Everyone reacts differently under pressure," I said carefully. But inside, I knew it was more than that. Rebecca's need to dominate, to dictate, and to impress had escalated into a dangerous arrogance, one that would unravel spectacularly if left unchecked. As the first guests began arriving, whispers of discontent began to surface. The staff, loyal to me, had subtly hinted at certain dynamics that were starting to become visible. The cousin I had spoken to weeks before, Emily, gave me a discreet nod as she entered the garden, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had noticed the way Rebecca barked orders even at the decorators, how she scrutinized every detail to the point of obsession, and how her veneer of perfection was beginning to crack under the weight of her own demands. Inside, Rebecca continued her frantic preparations, unaware that her carefully constructed world was teetering on the edge. She flitted from room to room, checking centerpieces, adjusting table settings, and criticizing staff for minor imperfections. The more she tried to maintain control, the more visible her insecurities became. Her laughter, meant to charm, now sounded forced, her smiles too sharp and brittle. And all the while, I remained in the background, quiet, observant, and in complete command of the environment she thought she owned. Then came the first real confrontation, though it was subtle. One of the waiters, a young man named Marcus who had been loyal to the manor for years, approached me with a nervous glance. "Caroline, she's snapping at everyone again. She even yelled at the photographer because he wanted to adjust the lighting. I think people are starting to notice how unreasonable she's being." I nodded calmly. "Thank you, Marcus. But keep monitoring, but remain professional. We need everything to proceed smoothly for now."
What was unfolding before me was the perfect storm. Rebecca's facade was cracking in front of her own guests, her arrogance spilling over into irritation and impatience. She thought she was controlling the narrative, but the cracks were visible to all who had eyes to see. Every gesture, every word, every sharp comment she made was evidence accumulating against her, and I was silently compiling it into a clear picture of who she truly was. By mid-afternoon, the tension reached a crescendo. Guests were seated in the ballroom, the garden wedding decor gleaming under the warm light. I could hear faint murmurs among the family, subtle questions directed at Emily and other relatives. "Where's Caroline? Wasn't she supposed to be the maid of honor? I thought she was involved in the planning." Rebecca's ears twitched as she caught snippets of these whispers. She walked briskly across the ballroom floor, adjusting the placement of a chair, her posture rigid with frustration. Daniel tried to intercept her, speaking gently, but she waved him off, her tone sharp and unyielding. "No, Daniel, it has to be perfect. I can't have anything ruined today. This is my wedding." And that's when I knew the moment was approaching, the pivot point where truth and arrogance would collide. I didn't need to announce my presence yet. The signs were clear. The staff was alert, guests were confused, Daniel's doubts were growing, and Rebecca herself was teetering on the edge of self-sabotage. The foundation she had built so carefully on control and manipulation was beginning to crumble under the weight of her own behavior. As I moved quietly through the manor, checking that every detail was in place for the ceremony, I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile.
She thought she had excluded me, erased me, and controlled the narrative completely. But the stage was set. The world she had constructed for herself was fragile, and I held the key to revealing the truth. All that remained was to wait for the precise moment to step forward, to let the evidence and my own presence speak louder than words ever could. Today, the spotlight belonged to her, or at least she thought it did. But in a matter of hours, the story would change and everyone present would realize just who had been quietly orchestrating the day from behind the scenes. The long wait, the silence, the careful gathering of proof, all of it was leading to this exact moment. Rebecca's wedding had begun, but her reign over the event was about to end. The moment came sooner than I expected, though I had long anticipated it. Rebecca was in the middle of her final walkthrough of the garden aisle, adjusting floral arrangements with a precision that bordered on obsessive when the first signs of confrontation began. Guests and staff were milling around, preparing for the ceremony, when whispers of discontent spread like wildfire. A few of the cousins who had been quietly observing her behavior for weeks exchanged uneasy glances. One of the bridesmaids, Allison, the one who had previously reached out to me, approached Linda and muttered something I couldn't hear, but the tension radiating from her was unmistakable. It was clear that Rebecca's mask was slipping, and for the first time, she was aware that people were seeing past her carefully curated facade. Her irritation escalated quickly. "No, that's not symmetrical," she snapped, flinging a rose aside as though it were an affront. "The arch has to be perfect. I will not have crooked flowers in my wedding photos. Daniel, do you even understand what this means?" Daniel, who had been quietly trying to mediate, raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Beck, it's beautiful. Honestly, the flowers," she interrupted, voice rising so sharply that nearby guests flinched. "Beautiful? Don't tell me it's beautiful when it's not. It has to be perfect. Every detail, every angle, every petal. If anyone thinks otherwise, it's wrong. Absolutely wrong." It was then that the murmurs from the guests grew louder. Someone asked quietly, "Where's Caroline?" And another whispered, "Wasn't she supposed to be helping with this?" The questions carried just enough volume that Rebecca heard them, and her eyes flicked in the direction of the murmurs, sharp and calculating. She realized for the first time that her orchestrated perfection was under scrutiny, and with that realization came panic. Rebecca spun toward the nearest bridesmaid, voice trembling with both anger and a desperate need to assert control. "I told you, nobody says anything without my approval. Did you hear me? I am in charge here. Everyone must follow instructions. Do you understand?" The bridesmaid nodded quickly, but it was clear her compliance was more out of fear than agreement. At that moment, Daniel stepped forward again, trying to calm her, but she waved him off, her tone sharp and unyielding. "No, Daniel, you don't get it. This is my day. This is the one time everyone has to see me exactly as I want them to see me."
And then it happened. My presence became visible. I had been walking quietly along the perimeter of the garden, observing, letting the tension build, and ensuring that everything was prepared for this precise moment. When Rebecca finally turned fully toward the entrance to confront the source of the whispers, our eyes met. For a heartbeat, her confident posture faltered. The arrogance that had defined her in every room she entered evaporated instantly. "You're here?" she said, voice catching slightly as she tried to regain control. I stepped forward slowly, deliberately, my heels clicking softly against the cobblestones. "Yes, Rebecca, I'm here," I said, my tone calm, measured, but carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. "I've been here all along." Gasps rippled through the guests. The cousins, bridesmaids, and staff who had long suspected the truth now turned their heads to see the sister who had been excluded. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to shock. Rebecca's composure, already fraying, began to unravel completely. You can't be here," she stammered, voice rising with panic. "This is my wedding. I decided who gets to be here and—" "Decided," I interrupted, holding up the signed contracts and permits that bore my name as owner of the manor. "Rebecca, this wedding exists here only because I allowed it. Every table, every chair, every arrangement, this is my space. You never had the power you thought you did." Her face paled as the words sank in. her carefully constructed illusion crumbling in real time. That's impossible. This is my day. What are you talking about? Linda, standing nearby, gave me a small, supportive nod. I continued, voice carrying clearly now so everyone could hear. You thought you could control everyone, dictate the narrative, and exclude me. But the truth is, I've been in control from the beginning, and everyone here has seen your behavior, your arrogance, your cruelty, your need to dominate every detail. It's undeniable now. Whispers erupted into murmurs of agreement. Guests who had been unsure began exchanging looks, nodding subtly as recognition dawned on them. Even Daniel, who had been caught between shock and confusion, stepped forward and placed a tentative hand on Rebecca's arm. "Beck, she's right," he said softly. "I saw it too. Your behavior, it's been extreme. People are noticing." Her face twisted with disbelief and rage. "No, this is ridiculous. You don't understand. I planned everything. I chose the flowers, the tables, the seating arrangements. I made this perfect. And in doing so," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "you alienated everyone who actually matters. You thought you were perfect, but you've been exposed for what you truly are, and now everyone can see it." Her mask of control shattered completely. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not of joy. They were of panic and shame. Guests shifted uncomfortably, the awkwardness tangible in the crisp autumn air. The staff exchanged knowing glances, no longer compelled to hide the truth of what they had endured behind the scenes. Rebecca's arrogance, once so commanding, now lay bare and vulnerable. I watched her, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and pity. This wasn't about humiliation for me. This was about truth finally being acknowledged, about people seeing beyond the carefully constructed image of perfection she had projected for years. She had thought she could manipulate the world, but the world and the truth had caught up with her. And in that moment, as the garden quieted and the weight of realization settled on everyone present, I knew the tide had turned. The confrontation had begun, and Rebecca's reign of control had ended. The truth was finally out. The fallout from the confrontation was immediate, intense, and suffocating, like a storm that had been building for months, finally crashing down. For a brief, surreal moment, there was silence in the garden. Guests shifted uneasily, unsure where to look or what to say. I stood quietly, allowing Rebecca's words and expressions to speak for themselves. But then the backlash began. Rebecca, once so composed in her facade of perfection, lashed out in a torrent of anger and desperation. You can't do this! I am the bride! Everyone should be on my side! You've ruined everything!" she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. Her hands flailed toward the floral arrangements, threatening to topple the painstakingly arranged roses and peonies, and a few of the younger cousins instinctively stepped back, startled by the sudden intensity of her outburst. Daniel tried to intervene, gently taking her hands. "Beck, calm down. This isn't helping. Don't touch me," she snapped, jerking free. "I can't believe you'd side with her. Caroline, how could you? After everything, you've humiliated me in front of everyone." Her words stung, but I stood firm, allowing the moment to unfold. Every accusation she hurled was a confirmation of what I already knew. She had never valued me, had never understood me, and had always assumed that I would remain invisible, silent, and powerless. The difference now was that I wasn't. I had the truth, the venue, the staff, and the witnesses. I wasn't here to fight her. I was here to let reality speak. Yet the intensity of her emotional eruption shook even me. The rawness of her anger, combined with the echoes of disbelief from guests, created a wave of tension that was almost physical. Some of the older family members looked horrified, unsure how to respond to this spectacle. Emily and a few other cousins moved closer to me quietly, offering supportive glances but saying nothing. They understood that stepping in might escalate the situation further.
Daniel remained calm presence near Rebecca, though his expression showed both concern and doubt, as if he were beginning to truly see the consequences of her behavior for the first time. The staff, who had been quietly observing and managing chaos behind the scenes, began to visibly relax. They no longer had to pretend that everything was normal. Linda, standing near me, whispered, "She's finally showing her true self. People are seeing it, Caroline. This is the moment." And they were. The guests who had previously been charmed or intimidated by Rebecca's carefully constructed persona were now witnessing the real person behind the perfection. The laughter that had once seemed effortless now sounded forced and strained. The pride and authority she had displayed just minutes ago reduced to defensive fury. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of shock, awkwardness, and growing clarity. For me, the moment was bittersweet. I felt a surge of validation, a quiet sense of justice that years of being overlooked and excluded had finally culminated in undeniable recognition. And yet, I also felt the weight of responsibility. This confrontation, though necessary, had consequences. Rebecca's reaction was explosive, her shame and anger raw. While I had anticipated resistance, the emotional intensity of watching her unravel in front of everyone, even knowing it was deserved, was exhausting and unsettling. When she finally fell silent, breathing heavily, a trembling mix of anger and humiliation on her face, the room remained quiet. The reality of the situation began to settle on those present. Family members exchanged careful glances, some nodding almost imperceptibly in acknowledgement of what had been revealed. Daniel looked at Rebecca with a mixture of sadness and realization, the first true cracks appearing in their relationship. The staff began to quietly tidy up, maintaining professionalism, but no longer hiding the relief on their faces. For me, the silence that followed was deafening. It was the aftermath of truth laid bare, and I felt the emotional toll of the confrontation settle over me. I had acted with intention, not malice, but the consequences, Rebecca's anger, the guests' unease, the ripple of shock through the family, were immediate and undeniable. I had stepped out of the shadows and reclaimed my voice. But it came with the stark realization that truth often carries weight that isn't easily contained. I retreated to a quiet corner of the manor to collect my thoughts. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the emotional intensity of the morning. I had long prepared for this moment, meticulously gathering evidence, observing, and calculating the right timing. And yet, experiencing the real-time impact of exposing Rebecca's behavior, seeing her unravel, and the shock of the guests was more overwhelming than I had imagined. Even amidst the turmoil, I couldn't deny the sense of empowerment that coursed through me. For the first time in years, I had been seen, acknowledged, and respected, not for my ability to stay quiet or please others, but simply for being present, aware, and unwavering. Rebecca had tried to erase me, belittle me, and exclude me, but all of it had been rendered meaningless in the face of truth. And yet, the day was far from over. While the confrontation had exposed her arrogance and cruelty, the wedding itself was still unfolding. Guests were seated, the ceremony was about to begin, and the question lingered, how would the remainder of the day unfold? Would Rebecca retreat entirely into anger and humiliation? Or would the exposure of truth allow space for some semblance of reconciliation, however fragile? I understood then that this was only the beginning of the consequences she would face. Relationships would need to be repaired, trust reconsidered, and the narrative she had tried so hard to control would never be the same. And for me, the emotional challenge was clear. Standing firm in truth comes with a cost, and it was a cost I had now willingly accepted. As the sunlight filtered through the manor's grand windows, casting a warm glow over the preparations for the ceremony, I took a deep breath. The confrontation had shifted everything. The power dynamics, the perception, the relationships. Rebecca's behavior had been revealed, undeniable and raw. The guests had seen, the staff had witnessed, and I had claimed the role I had long been denied. The storm of consequences had begun, and there was no turning back. The ceremony began with a heavy air of anticipation, the sunlight spilling across the perfectly arranged garden, illuminating the guests who were now keenly aware of the morning's confrontation. Every step down the aisle was amplified by the tension lingering in the air, as if the universe itself held its breath to witness the next act of this unfolding drama. Rebecca walked beside Daniel, her posture rigid, her smile forced, and every motion calculated to project control. But control had already slipped through her fingers. The subtle glances from family and friends, some sympathetic, some incredulous, made it clear that the illusion of perfection she had cultivated for years was irreparably cracked. I lingered near the entrance, the quiet authority of ownership grounding me, a steady presence amidst the chaos she had created. As the music swelled and the ceremony commenced, I noticed how small details began to betray Rebecca further. The staff, once obedient in a tense silence, were now moving with quiet confidence. Every decorative flourish, every placement of a chair or flower was perfectly executed, not because she demanded it, but because I had ensured that the manor's standards would be upheld, regardless of her tantrums. Guests whispered under their breath, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. "I can't believe what she said. She's unreal. Why wasn't Caroline here all along?" Even Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he reached to take her hand, the unease and disbelief evident in his subtle movements. Rebecca attempted to regain composure as she reached the altar, where the officiant, a longtime friend of the family, waited. Her voice wavered slightly as she greeted the guests, but she pushed forward, desperate to maintain the facade of dominance. "Welcome, everyone, to this very special day," she began, tone bright but brittle. The words sounded hollow to those who knew the truth, and the moment I saw the tiniest falter in her eyes, I knew that her armor had completely disintegrated. It was time. I stepped forward from the sidelines, letting my presence be felt without a word at first. The guests' attention shifted, murmurs rippling through the crowd. When I finally spoke, my voice carried clearly across the garden, calm and measured. "I think it's important that everyone here understands the truth," I said, glancing briefly at Rebecca, who froze, her face a mixture of shock, fear, and disbelief. "This day has been planned in my venue, with the support of my staff and under my oversight. Everything here, from the seating arrangements to the floral designs, has been executed to ensure that the wedding could happen despite the tension and challenges. And yet, I was deliberately excluded." Gasps spread across the garden. Guests turned toward her, the reality of my words sinking in. Rebecca's attempts at control, her exclusion of me, and her arrogant assumptions about the narrative had been laid bare for everyone to see. I reached into my bag and held up the recording I had collected at the rehearsal dinner. "These words were spoken in front of your guests and your staff. They reflect the behavior you displayed when you believed no one was listening, and they confirm that the decisions to exclude and demean were intentional, not accidental." The silence was deafening, the tension tangible. Guests leaned in to hear the faint playback, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock as Rebecca's own voice confirmed her cruelty. Daniel's face turned pale, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Even her bridesmaids, some of whom had whispered to me beforehand, now looked both vindicated and unsettled. She had built her empire of perfection on lies and manipulation, and now the evidence was inescapable, undeniable, and public. Rebecca tried to speak, to deflect, to reassert control. "Caroline, this is my wedding. You can't—" But her voice faltered as more guests turned to look at her, the weight of observation pressing down. Emily, standing a few steps away, shook her head subtly, giving me a small, encouraging smile. Other family members exchanged glances that spoke volumes: disbelief, disappointment, and finally, understanding.
They had all seen hints of her behavior over the years, but now the truth had been presented in the most undeniable form. Concrete evidence, corroborated by witnesses, laid out in the open. Rebecca tried to speak, to deflect, to reassert control. "Caroline, this is my wedding. You can't—" But her voice faltered as more guests turned to look at her, the weight of observation pressing down. Emily, standing a few steps away, shook her head subtly, giving me a small, encouraging smile. Other family members exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Disbelief, disappointment, and finally, understanding. They had all seen hints of her behavior over the years, but now the truth had been presented in the most undeniable form. Concrete evidence, corroborated by witnesses, laid out in the open.
As the officiant cleared his throat and the ceremony moved forward, the atmosphere was electric with tension and clarity. The truth had taken center stage, eclipsing every carefully crafted lie and manipulation. Rebecca, though still present, was no longer in control. The event she had tried to dominate from the beginning now unfolded under a new reality. The exposure of her actions, the acknowledgement of her behavior, and the subtle but unmistakable authority of the sister she had sought to erase. By the time the vows began, the shift in energy was complete. Guests were attentive, Daniel was hesitant but present, and Rebecca's composure remained fragile, teetering on the edge of collapse. I stayed to the side, not as a disruptor, but as a quiet presence of truth. The wedding, once her stage of control, had become the platform for exposure, accountability, and ultimately, a reclaiming of power that had been denied to me for years. The day had transformed from one of exclusion and manipulation into a revelation, and the final act was still unfolding, with the resolution and vindication soon to come. The ceremony concluded, the music fading into a soft hum as guests lingered in the garden. Some whispering quietly, others exchanging knowing glances. The air was still heavy with the tension of the morning, but a subtle shift had begun to settle over the gathering. Rebecca, pale and shaken, lingered near the floral arch, unable to fully reassemble her shattered composure. Daniel stood close, gently holding her arm, but his expression was clouded with realization and disappointment. The truth had transformed the dynamics of the day. What was supposed to be a flawless celebration of love had become a reckoning of behavior, a public unveiling of arrogance, cruelty, and exclusion. I remained near the perimeter, observing, letting the guests process what they had witnessed. The staff, once tense and obedient out of fear, now carried themselves with quiet confidence. They exchanged small, discreet smiles, a subtle acknowledgement of justice finally being served. Linda approached me, leaning slightly toward my ear. "They all see it now," she whispered. "Your voice, your presence, it's undeniable. Rebecca's facade couldn't survive the truth." I nodded, taking a deep breath, allowing myself a rare moment of satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, fairness, and the acknowledgement of the reality that had been ignored for too long. As the reception began, the energy shifted again. Guests who had been unsure or hesitant now sought me out, offering quiet words of gratitude and recognition. "I'm glad you were here," one cousin said softly. "It's about time someone spoke up." Others nodded, sharing glances that conveyed their newfound understanding of the dynamics between Rebecca and me. The exclusion I had endured for years, once a source of quiet frustration and hurt, was now recognized openly. My presence was no longer a background detail, it was central, the axis around which the truth had finally revolved. Rebecca remained near the edge of the reception, flanked by a few of her most loyal bridesmaids, but even their expressions betrayed discomfort. She had tried to maintain authority, to salvage a sense of control, but it was impossible now. The day's events had exposed her for everyone to see, and her attempt to dominate the narrative had collapsed under the undeniable weight of evidence and public awareness. Even Daniel's tentative attempts at reconciliation carried an undertone of caution. He now understood
painfully, the consequences of ignoring behavior he had previously dismissed. Amid the shifting dynamics, small gestures of acknowledgement began to ripple through the crowd. Guests approached me with quiet congratulations, thanking me not just for my role in the wedding's execution, but for finally ensuring that the truth was known. It was a moment of vindication that went beyond personal satisfaction. It was an affirmation of integrity, courage, and the subtle but powerful effect of standing firm in truth. I realized as the warm autumn light faded into soft evening hues that the impact of my presence and actions extended far beyond the confines of a single day. Relationships had been realigned, perceptions shifted, and the power of honesty had transformed the gathering. Rebecca, eventually, retreated from the center of attention. Her movements were slower, more tentative, as if navigating an unfamiliar world where her control no longer dictated the responses of others. The arrogance and certainty that defined her presence were gone, replaced by a mixture of shame, frustration, and begrudging acknowledgement of reality. Daniel remained at her side, though his expression suggested that the path forward would require careful negotiation, understanding, and reflection. The family, previously complicit in maintaining appearances, now recognized the truth of her behavior and were adjusting their own expectations and interactions accordingly. In the quiet moments, away from the guests, I took a deep breath and allowed myself to reflect. This had been a long journey, not just the culmination of the morning's confrontation, but the years of navigating exclusion, subtle cruelty, and deliberate erasure. For so long, I had been relegated to the background, my contributions minimized, my presence dismissed. Today, the narrative had shifted. The truth had been acknowledged openly, my role recognized, and the arrogance that had previously dominated the day had been dismantled with clarity and calm precision.
Even as the reception continued, laughter and music filling the manor's gardens, I understood the broader significance. This wasn't merely about a single wedding or one person's behavior. It was about the ripple effect of courage, integrity, and the refusal to remain invisible in the face of deliberate exclusion. By standing firm, by allowing the evidence to speak, and by maintaining composure in the midst of confrontation, the balance had shifted. Relationships were recalibrated, respect had been restored, and the path forward, though delicate, was now defined by honesty rather than pretense. By the end of the evening, the tension had eased. Guests danced and celebrated, though the undercurrent of the day's revelations lingered subtly in conversations and glances. Daniel and Rebecca moved through the crowd, attempting to project normalcy, though the fractures were visible to anyone who looked closely. The staff, freed from the anxiety of appeasing unreasonable demands, carried themselves with quiet pride, subtly acknowledging the truth of what had occurred. And I, standing on the edge of the dance floor, allowed myself the rare luxury of satisfaction, knowing that my voice had been heard, my presence recognized, and the balance restored. The day, once dominated by exclusion and arrogance, had ended with recognition, clarity, and the subtle but undeniable triumph of truth. I had reclaimed my role, not with anger, but with quiet authority. The family had witnessed the reality of Rebecca's behavior. The guests had observed integrity in action, and the staff had seen that honesty and competence would ultimately prevail. And in that moment, as the final light faded across the gardens of the manor, I knew that the story had shifted irrevocably. The narrative of exclusion had been replaced with one of empowerment, truth, and vindication. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the gardens of the manor, I finally allowed myself a deep, unguarded breath. The day had been intense, tumultuous, and charged with emotions that had threatened to overwhelm me. Yet now, in the quiet aftermath of the chaos, there was a profound sense of closure. The wedding, once a stage for Rebecca's arrogance and manipulation, had become a platform for truth, integrity, and the reclamation of my presence. I walked slowly among the lingering guests, the soft murmur of conversations blending with the distant music that still played from the reception. Their expressions reflected understanding, curiosity, and respect, a testament to the power of honesty and the courage to assert oneself when deliberately erased. The staff approached me quietly, their faces betraying a mixture of relief, gratitude, and admiration. Linda was first, offering a subtle nod that conveyed the shared understanding of what had transpired. "You did it," she whispered, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You stood firm and they saw it. They all saw it." I smiled faintly, the satisfaction deep but measured. It wasn't about triumph over Rebecca. It was about recognition, fairness, and the restoration of the balance that had long been denied. I had been invisible, minimized, and dismissed for years. But now, standing amid the warm glow of the gardens, the truth had placed me squarely in the light where I belonged. Even Rebecca, though subdued and still visibly shaken, had begun to process the events of the day. I could see in her eyes a mixture of shame, disbelief, and perhaps the faintest trace of understanding. The arrogance that once dominated her every gesture had dissipated, replaced by the vulnerability that comes when a carefully maintained facade collapses under undeniable evidence. Daniel, quietly supportive yet reflective, hovered near her, signaling that the path forward would require care, honesty, and acknowledgement of reality. It was a subtle reminder that consequences, when faced, could reshape relationships in ways that were both difficult and necessary. I found a quiet spot overlooking the gardens, the soft hum of the guests in the background providing a gentle soundtrack to the emotions swirling inside me. The manor, my home and my responsibility, had been the silent witness to years of exclusion and quiet endurance. Today, it had become the stage upon which truth had finally been acknowledged. And as I looked over the grounds, I felt the weight of both relief and empowerment settle into my chest. I had reclaimed my narrative, not through confrontation alone, but through deliberate, calm assertion of my role, the careful gathering of evidence, and the unwavering commitment to truth. In the hours that followed, I spoke quietly with guests, listening to their reflections and observations. Many shared insights that validated my experience, acknowledging the subtle injustices they had witnessed over the years but had hesitated to address. Their recognition was quiet but meaningful, a collective affirmation that my presence, voice, and competence were undeniable. It was more than vindication. It was a restoration of respect and acknowledgement that had long been overdue.
As the evening drew on and the last guests departed, leaving the manor bathed in the gentle glow of lanterns and moonlight, I took a solitary walk along the perimeter of the gardens. The cool air carried the faint scent of autumn leaves and roses, a reminder of the beauty and serenity that had been both overshadowed and revealed by the events of the day. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, the years of being sidelined, the small slights, the deliberate exclusions, and the quiet endurance that had prepared me for this moment. All of it had led to the present, a transformation not only in the perception of others, but in my own understanding of my strength, resolve, and worth. The truth had prevailed, but more importantly, the experience had reshaped me. I realized that empowerment did not come solely from confrontation or exposure. It came from understanding one's own value, standing firm in integrity, and patiently allowing the reality of one's actions to speak louder than accusations or deception ever could. The events of the day had illuminated a path forward, one where I could assert my presence unapologetically, embrace my voice, and continue to cultivate spaces of fairness,
recognition, and authenticity for myself and those around me. Returning to the manor, I paused to glance at the main hall where the wedding had been orchestrated. Everything remained pristine, a testament to the dedication of the staff and the careful planning that had allowed the day to proceed despite the turmoil. Yet the hall also symbolized something deeper, the enduring power of truth, the importance of standing firm when confronted with exclusion, and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming one's narrative. The manor, once merely a backdrop for others' ambitions, now felt like an extension of my own agency, a place where my authority and integrity could not be questioned or diminished. As I finally settled into a chair in the softly lit room, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Today had been more than a victory. It had been a lesson in resilience, courage, and the quiet but undeniable strength that comes from asserting one's rightful place in the world. The guests had witnessed truth triumph over arrogance. The staff had experienced acknowledgement and relief. And Rebecca had been forced to confront her own actions in a way that could not be denied or ignored. And I, at the center of it all, had emerged not only validated, but transformed, empowered by the knowledge that standing firm in integrity yields rewards that extend far beyond a single day or event. As the moon rose high, casting silver light over the gardens and manor, I realized that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The exclusion, the marginalization, and the deliberate erasure that had marked so many years of my life had been replaced by recognition, purpose, and clarity. I understood now that my role extended beyond personal vindication. It was a reminder to myself and others that integrity, patience, and courage in the face of manipulation have a power that cannot be ignored. The day had concluded, the wedding was behind us, and a new chapter had begun, one defined not by the limitations imposed by others, but by the strength, wisdom, and resolve that come from standing firmly in one's truth. I rose from the chair, feeling lighter, stronger, and more complete than I had in years. The manor, the gardens, the quiet echoes of the evening, they all whispered a message I would carry forward. The truth has power, courage matters, and one's voice, when exercised with clarity and conviction, can change everything. And in that realization, I found peace, empowerment, and a purpose renewed, a life no longer defined by exclusion, but by the undeniable presence of truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.